It's February 13th, 1961, and three amateur rockhounds, Wallace Lane, Virginia Maxey, and Mike Mikesell, were out searching for geodes to sell in their small gem and gift shop. After a long morning, they'd gathered a sack full of promising specimens. The next day, back in their workshop, Mikesell fired up his diamond-bladed saw to slice one open, expecting to find beautiful amethyst crystals inside. Instead, the saw screeched, shuddered, and a nearly new blade was utterly destroyed. Inside the rock wasn't the hollow, crystal-lined cavity, but something completely impossible. It was a perfectly circular cylinder of what looks like white porcelain, with a 2 millimeter shaft of bright magnetic metal running through its center. This was the birth of the Koso artifact, an object that would soon become a legend in the world of out-of-place artifacts. The discoverers examined it more closely, finding other strange features. The porcelain was wrapped in a hexagonal casing, and there were layers of what seemed to be decomposing copper. Even stranger, embedded in the outer crust of this hardened, clay-like rock were what looked like a nail and a washer. But the detail that truly ignited the firestorm of speculation came from Virginia Maxey. She claimed that an unnamed geologist had examined fossil shells on the object's surface and declared that the nodule had taken at least 500,000 years to form. If this was to be believed, what they found was a half-million-year-old machine-made object. The claim was staggering, and though the geologist was never identified and their findings were never published, the story took on a life of its own. It was supposedly the perfect oopart, a piece of advanced technology where it shouldn't possibly exist. The theories that erupted were as spectacular as the claim itself. For some, this was tangible proof of a lost, hyper-advanced ancient civilization like Atlantis or Mu, a relic of forgotten science. Others looked to the stars, suggesting it was a piece of equipment dropped by prehistoric ancient astronauts during a visit to Earth. A third popular theory proposed it was the result of a time traveler's mishap, a modern device accidentally left behind in the deep past. The artifact also became a celebrated piece of evidence for young Earth creationists. While it seems paradoxical for those who believe in a 6,000-year-old Earth to champion a 500,000-year-old object, their goal wasn't to validate the age. Instead, they used it as a tool to argue that scientific dating methods were fundamentally flawed. If geologists could be so wrong about this rock, they argued, then their dating of everything else must be unreliable too. Interestingly, these young Earth creationists were essentially the first ones to unequivocally be on the side of the final scientific explanation. For decades, the mystery festered, fueled by a few grainy photos and X-rays. The artifact itself vanished from public view, held by Wallace Lane, who refused to let anyone else examine it. But in the late 1990s, a pair of skeptical investigators, Pierre Stromberg and Paul Heinrich, decided to solve the case once and for all. They started with the most basic claim about whether the object was a geode at all, and the answer was disappointing. Geodes have very specific characteristics: a hard outer shell of chalcedony and an inner lining of quartz crystals. The Koso artifact had neither, and its encasing material was soft, with a hardness of only 3 on the Mohs scale. It wasn't a geode, it was a concretion, and this distinction is critical. While geodes take millennia to form, concretions can form rapidly. When an iron or steel object is left in the ground, the process of rusting can cause minerals in the surrounding soil and water to precipitate and cement sediment around it. This forms a hard nodule in a matter of decades, not over the course of untold eons like a geode. The foundation of the mystery, the immense age, had crumbled, but they also wanted to find out what the object actually was. Using the old X-rays that were publicly available, Stromberg and Heinrich had a hunch and reached out to an unusual group of experts, the spark plug collectors of America. The reaction was immediate and unanimous, and the collectors positively identified the object as a 1920s-era Champion spark plug, the kind widely used in Ford Model T vehicles. Suddenly, every mysterious detail clicked into place. The porcelain cylinder was the plug's insulator, and the hexagonal casing was the impression left by the plug's steel hex nut. The case was effectively closed, but the final confirmation came in 2018. Stromberg was contacted by the family of one of the discoverers and was finally able to physically inspect the artifact. A geologist from the University of Washington confirmed it was a simple iron oxide concretion. Importantly, the geologist found no evidence of the fossil shells that had started the 500,000-year-old claim in the first place. The Coso artifact wasn't a relic of Atlantis, a piece of an alien spaceship, or a time traveler's lost tool. It was very literally a piece of trash. Still, the mystery of the Coso artifact isn't entirely resolved at this point, even if the underlying issues all are. Whether the Coso artifact was an intentional hoax or a case of mistaken identity remains debated, though most evidence points to the latter. It's believed that the original finders thought they had discovered something truly spectacular and took it to an amateur geologist who provided quote-unquote confirmation. It's speculated that after that point, they ended up taking it to someone more reputable who advised them it was just a plain old concretion. After that, it's speculated that the original finders didn't really want any more attention on the object. That said, it's impossible to know if the story was a deliberate fabrication or simply an extraordinary misunderstanding. On a sunny afternoon in 1967, a wealthy American stepped away from a cottage in the Malaysian highlands and vanished without a trace. Jim Thompson, an American veteran turned Thai silk tycoon, went missing in Malaysia's Cameron Highlands, never to be seen again. His disappearance on that Easter Sunday shocked the world and made international headlines. Despite a massive manhunt, no clues were ever found, and the case became one of the most enduring mysteries of Southeast Asia. Born in 1906 to a wealthy Delaware family, Thompson lived a life of adventure and reinvention. He was an architect by training, served as an Office of Strategic Services agent, and was later a savvy businessman in Bangkok. In the 1950s, Thompson co-founded the Thai Silk Company and almost single-handedly revived Thailand's silk weaving industry. His vibrant silk textiles caught global attention, featured on Broadway and in Hollywood, and earned him fame as the Silk King of Thailand. Personally, I would have gone with the Silk King of Siam for the alliterative value, but that's just me. The venture made him immensely wealthy, and by 1967 he was a multimillionaire many times over. By the 1960s, Thompson was a fixture of Bangkok high society, known for hosting lavish parties at his Thai-style mansion. His dinner parties drew illustrious guests, such as writers Somerset Maugham and Truman Capote. He was also an independent thinker deeply interested in Southeast Asian politics. Keep this part in mind because perhaps ironically, he believed the West had too much influence there. In March 1967, Jim Thompson, then 61, took a much-needed vacation to the Cameron Highlands of Malaysia. This was a cool hill retreat once popular with British colonial administrators. He traveled with a close friend, Connie Mangskow, to stay at Moonlight Bungalow, a getaway owned by his friend, Dr. Ling. On Easter Sunday, March 26, 1967, Thompson attended church in the morning with his companions and returned for lunch at the cottage. Around 1:30 p.m., he announced he was heading out for an afternoon stroll, waving goodbye as he walked down the bungalow's lone access road into the surrounding greenery. His companions noted he had been unusually restless and impatient that day, although nothing seemed seriously wrong. By late afternoon, Thompson had not returned. At first, his friends weren't alarmed. He was an experienced outdoorsman and former officer who knew his way around the jungle. But as dusk fell and he still hadn't shown up for evening tea, concern grew. Dr. Ling drove to a nearby clubhouse to see if Thompson had stopped in, but nobody there had seen him. With nightfall approaching, the reality set in. Jim Thompson was missing. The next morning, an all-out search was launched. Local police, the army, Aboriginal Orang Asli trackers, British servicemen on leave, and scores of volunteers fanned out through the highlands to look for any sign of the missing American. It quickly became the largest manhunt in Malaysian history, spanning dense jungle, steep ravines, and surrounding villages. Over an 11-day official search, more than 500 people scoured about 50 square miles of terrain, yet not a single clue turned up. After 11 days, the searchers admitted that they weren't going to find him and called it off. With no hard facts to go on, speculation about Jim Thompson's fate has run rampant for decades. The simplest explanation is that Thompson went for a walk and never made it back. He might have slipped into a hidden ravine or gotten trapped, ultimately dying of exposure in the wilderness. Even after the massive search, it's possible his body lay just outside the area that was combed. Many believe this kind of fatal mishap is still the likeliest scenario. Yet the failure to find any trace of him keeps this theory firmly in the unconfirmed column. Given Thompson's fame and fortune, foul play was an obvious suspicion. One notion was a kidnapping for ransom, but no ransom note ever came, and there were no signs of a struggle when he left the cottage. Police also noted that Western tourists were rarely targets for kidnappers in Malaysia then, and the large rewards offered produced no leads. The reasoning for this is that wealthy locals were generally much easier targets for ransom, since there was no risk of turning a for-profit abduction into an international incident. A more sinister twist on the foul play theory involves the intrigue that was common between the Soviets and the Americans during this period. During the 1960s, communist insurgencies were active in the region, and some speculated that communist guerrillas might have captured or slain Thompson for political reasons. Thompson had openly opposed American involvement in Vietnam, and even met with Indo-Chinese communist figures during his travels. However, under this theory, his deep ties to the American intelligence establishment proved to be the metaphorical woodpeckers that pecked apart the trust between him and these groups. Decades later, in 2017, a documentary film claimed that new evidence showed Thompson was slain by Communist Party rebels in Malaysia. According to the filmmakers, he wasn't just vacationing, he had ventured into the jungle seeking a meeting with the guerrilla's leader. However, they grew suspicious of him, and figured it was better to err on the side of caution. This dramatic claim, however, relies on second-hand accounts from relatives of the supposed perpetrators, and no definitive proof has been presented. Another theory is that Thompson orchestrated his own disappearance to carry out covert work. Some have suggested he went underground to engage in some sort of intelligence mission. A few of Thompson's former colleagues even wondered if he had defected to the communists, since he was sympathetic to their cause. In the period before he vanished, Thompson was said to be frustrated with the Thai government and disillusioned with American policy in the region. However, there are no confirmed sightings that have ever placed Thompson alive after 1967, despite the occasional rumor. Finally, some speculate that a jealous rival or enemy might have targeted Thompson. His success in the silk trade, his fame, or past conflicts could have given someone motive to do him harm. One eerie coincidence has fueled this theory. A few months after Jim disappeared, his sister was found slain in her Pennsylvania home. The timing led some to wonder if the two cases were connected, that perhaps an unknown adversary was targeting the Thompson family. Investigators never solved the slaying of his sister, and officially there are no connections between the two cases. That said, I do have to question how investigators on the opposite side of the world could have possibly meaningfully linked up and shared notes in the 60s. More than half a century later, Jim Thompson's fate remains an enigma, a completely unsolved mystery. Perhaps the simplest explanation is the correct one, that Jim Thompson went for a walk, had a fatal accident, and was never found. Yet without evidence, ideas connecting his disappearance to espionage, family wealth, and the geopolitical landscape will continue to swirl. The air over Australia's Bass Strait was perfectly calm on the evening of October 21st, 1978. Visibility was excellent, the winds were light, and a pilot flying high enough could see the beam of the Cape Otway lighthouse cutting through the twilight from miles away. It was, by all accounts, an ideal night for flying. Inside the cockpit of a single-engine Cessna 182L, 20-year-old Frederick Valentich was about an hour into his planned flight from Moorabbin Airport near Melbourne to King Island. At 7:06 p.m., his voice, professional and measured, crackled over the radio to the Melbourne Flight Service Unit. He asked the controller, Steve Roby, a simple, routine question if there was any known air traffic below 5,000 feet. Roby replied that there wasn't. But Valentich insisted there was something there. He could see something. He described 4 bright lights, like landing lights, on what he thought was a large aircraft. He said that it had just passed about 1,000 feet above him at an incredible speed. Over the next 6 minutes, a routine flight spiraled into one of aviation's most profound and enduring unsolved mysteries. The conversation that unfolded between the lone pilot and the ground controller was one of escalating strangeness. Valentich reported that the object was now approaching him from the east. His tone wasn't one of outright panic, but of genuine, deepening confusion. He suggested the other pilot was playing around with him, orbiting him 2 or 3 times at speeds he couldn't identify. Roby, unable to see anything on his radar, pressed for details. Valentich struggled to provide them. He described the object as a long shape with a shiny metallic surface and a green light on it. At one point, he reported that the object had simply vanished, only to reappear moments later from a different direction. Then came the most unsettling part of the transmission. Valentich stated that his plane's engine was beginning to run rough. He told Roby his intention was still to fly to King Island, but his focus was on the object now hovering directly above him. Roby asked him once more to identify the craft. Valentich's final chilling words were, quote, "It's hovering and it's not an aircraft." Following that declaration, his microphone remained open, while bizarre noises came through. Then there was nothing but absolute silence, and Frederick Valentich had vanished, never to be seen again. Frederick Valentich was, by all accounts, consumed by a passion for aviation. He was a member of the Royal Australian Air Force's Air Training Corps, and was absolutely determined to build a career as a pilot. Aviation was his central ambition in life, but his dream was proving difficult to achieve. He had applied to enlist as a military pilot twice, but was rejected both times due to inadequate educational qualifications. Undeterred, he pursued a commercial pilot's license as a civilian, but his academic struggles continued. He had a poor achievement record, having failed all 5 of his commercial license examination subjects on 2 separate occasions. Just a month before his disappearance, he had failed 3 of those subjects for a 3rd time. His record also included several questionable flying incidents. He had been formally warned for straying into a controlled zone in Sydney, and had twice deliberately flown into clouds. This cloud issue was an infraction for which authorities were reportedly considering prosecution since he just kept doing it. This paints a picture of a young pilot whose confidence may have significantly outpaced his proven competence. It also shows that he was someone who might be prone to taking risks for no real apparent reason. Adding another critical layer to his psychological profile was a deep personal interest. According to his dad, Frederick was an ardent believer in extraterrestrials and had expressed concerns about being attacked by them. While it appears to be undoubted that he believed in them, some have questioned whether he really believed that he would come under assault. This pre-existing belief system provides a powerful lens through which his final, terrifying report can be interpreted. The flight plan itself had some pretty severe inconsistencies from the very beginning. The aircraft was a reliable workhorse of a plane, and it had just passed a 100-hour inspection with flying colors. Curiously, Frederick had filled its tanks with enough gas for 300 minutes of flight, a fact that would fuel significant speculation on this case. And I'm just going to pause there for a second, because I didn't realize what I had written there until I was recording. Anyway, this fuel gave him 500 miles of range, when he only needed 150 miles of range to get to King Island and back. The flight plan he filed was straightforward. Depart Moorabbin, fly west over Cape Otway, then turn south across the Bass Strait to King Island. The mystery lay not in the plan, but in its purpose. Valentich provided conflicting and ultimately false reasons for his journey. He told flight officials he was going to pick up friends, even taking 4 life jackets with him. He told his family and girlfriend he was going to collect crayfish. Investigations later confirmed that no one was waiting for him on King Island, and there were no crayfish to be had. The most glaring anomaly was a critical procedural failure. For any pilot intending to land at an uncontrolled airstrip like King Island's at night, it was standard and necessary procedure to call ahead and arrange for the runway lights to be turned on. Valentich never made that call, and this omission, combined with having way too much fuel, strongly suggests that he never actually intended to land on King Island. The destination seems to have been a fiction, a cover for a flight with a different, unknown purpose. That said, there were clearly some competency issues with Frederick's flying ability, so it is always possible that he simply forgot to make this critical call to the airstrip in advance. He also seems like he was more than a bit of a cowboy in the cockpit, so he may have simply wanted to attempt a more dangerous landing. This case has been highly controversial, and there's been numerous theories to explain what happened to Frederick, ranging from down to earth to out of this world. The most widely accepted conventional explanation centers on a deadly phenomenon known as spatial disorientation. Flying over a featureless body of water at dusk, with the horizon blurring into darkness, can trick a pilot's senses. An inexperienced and perhaps incompetent pilot could easily lose their sense of which way is up. In this state, the aircraft's own lights reflecting off the calm water below could appear as another craft maneuvering beneath him. Alternatively, the 4 bright lights he reported could have been a conjunction of the planets Venus, Mars, and Mercury, along with the bright star Antares. To a disoriented pilot, these stationary celestial bodies could create the powerful illusion of an object pacing his aircraft. If he began to circle, as he reported he was doing, the planets would appear to be orbiting him. Distracted and trusting his faulty senses over his instruments, he could have inadvertently put the Cessna into what's known as a graveyard spiral. This is a tightening, descending turn that becomes unrecoverable, leading to a high-speed impact with the water. Another set of theories looks not to the sky, but to Valentich's state of mind. His lifelong dream of a career in aviation was clearly stalling out in a major way. He wanted to be an aerial ace, and his chances of becoming a military pilot were completely shot. His chances of becoming a commercial pilot were also rapidly dwindling. The repeated exam failures and the looming threat of prosecution for his flying infractions represented significant psychological blows. Even if he was able to pass his tests, he would essentially be an uninsurable risk and wouldn't be able to get hired regardless. His girlfriend would later tell investigators that he was acting very unusually the night before the flight. This has led to speculation that the flight was a premeditated act. Perhaps he staged his own disappearance, using the Cessna's long-range fuel capacity to fly to a remote location and start a new life under a new identity. The elaborate story would have been the perfect cover to fly away and start new somewhere else. Of course, there's a more tragic version of this theory which suggests the flight was a way to leave behind his friends and family without the grief associated with an intentional act. The flight's lack of any legitimate purpose and his failure to arrange for landing lights lend credence to the idea that this was a one-way trip. However, his family and friends have always been adamant that he wouldn't have done this and was looking forward to the future. The third possibility is to take Frederick Valentich at his word. This theory claims that he was describing a real event as it happened. His report was detailed, his descriptions of the object's movements were specific, and his tone was one of genuine bewilderment rather than fabricated panic. This theory is bolstered by a number of belated eyewitness accounts from the ground. After the story hit the newspapers, several people came forward claiming to have seen strange, erratically moving green lights in the sky over the Bass Strait that same night. An amateur photographer named Roy Manifold was taking pictures of the sunset at Cape Otway around the time of the incident. I've put the Roy Manifold photograph up on the screen now, so if you're one of those people who just listens, take a look and tell me what you think this is. In the immediate aftermath, a massive 4-day air and sea search was launched, covering more than 1,000 square miles of ocean. Searchers found nothing. No wreckage, no personal effects, not even an oil slick that could be positively identified as coming from his Cessna. It was as if the pilot and his plane had simply been erased from existence. The Australian Department of Transport conducted a thorough investigation, but was ultimately unable to determine a cause. The official file was closed with the verdict, presumed fatal, for Valentich, leaving the case officially unresolved. For 5 years, the mystery hung in the air, fueled only by speculation and the haunting radio transcript. Then, in 1983, a piece of physical evidence finally surfaced. A piece of an engine was found washed ashore on an island hundreds of miles away. The Bureau of Air Safety Investigation confirmed that the part came from a Cessna 182, but was unable to determine if it specifically came from Valentich's aircraft. In the end, no one can say for sure what happened to Frederick Valentich, which is perhaps why his case remains so well known and widely discussed until this day. If you're a regular viewer, you know I don't usually ask this, but I'd definitely like to hear which theory you prefer in the comments below. I know there's also a bunch of theories out there on this one that I didn't touch on, but that's just because the lack of certainty gives theorists ample room for speculation. In the Fisherville neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky, there's a place where the serene beauty of nature collides with a dark legend. Pope Lick Creek is an idyllic slice of the Kentucky landscape, with hiking trails that wind through old-growth forests and meadows that bloom with wild flowers. But looming over it all is a skeletal finger of rusted steel, a 90-foot-high, 800-foot-long railroad trestle, owned and operated by Norfolk Southern Railway. This bridge is the stage for one of America's most unsettling legends, the tale of the Pope Lick Monster. For generations, stories have been whispered about a creature that haunts this spot, a grotesque hybrid of man and goat, or perhaps man and sheep. But the truly chilling part of this story isn't the monster. It's the very real, very long list of people who have perished here, lured to their doom not by a cryptid's hypnotic gaze, but by the siren song of the legend itself. Locals have described a creature with the muscular torso of a man and the fur-covered legs of a goat, complete with cloven hooves. While the earliest records seem to indicate that the creature was thought to be a sheepman, it morphed from a friendly sheep to the more satanically aligned barnyard animal later. Its face is said to be a pale alabaster mask, with wide-set eyes and sharp horns jutting from its forehead. The stories of its origin are extremely varied. The most popular version claims it was a circus freak, a horribly mistreated creature that escaped when a circus train derailed on the trestle during a violent thunderstorm. Another tale paints it as the twisted reincarnation of a farmer who sacrificed his goats to the devil for dark powers, only to be transformed into the very thing he destroyed. Still others rationalize the legend, suggesting it was just a reclusive hermit or a scientist disfigured in a lab accident who scared people away from the tracks. Whatever the case, the legend is clear that the monster uses hypnosis or mimics human voices to lure trespassers onto the trestle, right into the path of an oncoming train. But the truth is, the trestle needs no actual monster to eliminate its victims, and it's a perfect trap all on its own when combined with the legend. Contrary to a misconception popular among thrill seekers, the tracks aren't abandoned, not even in the slightest. They're a major and frequently used freight artery into Louisville. The bridge has no walkways or railings, just a few feet of uneven railroad ties on either side of the rails before a 9-story drop. The curve of the track and the surrounding woods can muffle the sound of an approaching train until it's too late. Once a train appears, there's no escape to be had unless the train coming is very short, and even then it requires ape-like athletic ability. A person can't outrun the train, and only the most elite grip athletes such as rock climbers possess the strength to hang from the side. For the 5 to 7 minutes it takes a long train to pass. For decades, people have come here to test their bravery, and for decades, people have perished. In 1987, 17-year-old Jack Baum was struck by a train while trying to get a glimpse of the Goat Man. In 2016, Raquel Bain, a 26-year-old tourist from Ohio, met her end while searching for the monster with her boyfriend. He only survived by dangling precariously from the side of the bridge as the train roared past, and fortunately for him, it was a relatively short train. In 2019, 15-year-old Savannah Bright was struck on the tracks, an incident that led her grieving parents to file a lawsuit against Norfolk Southern. They alleged the company hadn't done enough to secure what had become an attraction, which led to Bright being cut down by the train. The very unsettling thing about the Pope Lick monster is that it's a terrifying example of a cautionary tale that has become pathological. The purpose of the legend was presumably originally to scare teenagers away from going to this extremely dangerous train crossing. If it stayed like that, it would have been a localized version of the Hookman, a common urban legend which advises teenagers to stay away from secluded lovers' lanes. But the legend of the Goat Man does the opposite. It doesn't warn people away from the trestle, it beckons them closer. The prohibition against crossing the tracks to see the creature somehow transformed from a word of caution into a high-stakes dare that legitimately brings people in from around the world. In that way, the Pope Lick monster is almost like a Scooby-Doo villain, or at least it would be if it hadn't claimed so many lives.